Evelyn Carter had spent so many years living inside routines that she no longer noticed how quietly her world had become. Every morning began the same way: coffee brewing, laundry humming, and her husband Michael at the dining table reading emails. He had worn the same tired expression for years. Michael was dependable, kind in practical ways, never forgot to pay bills or lock doors. But somewhere between raising children and building a stable life, their marriage had settled into something safe and distant. Like two people walking side by side without ever really looking at one another anymore. Evelyn didn't blame him. She had changed too. She had stopped painting years ago, stopped taking long walks, stopped asking herself what she actually wanted, beyond keeping the household running smoothly. So when the unexpected phone call came from Richard Bennett, it felt like a window opened, in a room she hadn't realized was suffocating her. Richard was a man Evelyn barely knew, wealthy, reserved, and impeccably composed. During company dinners, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who noticed everything without saying much. His voice over the phone surprised her because it sounded warmer than she expected, calm and thoughtful instead of corporate and distant. He explained that he owned a lakeside retreat hidden deep in the mountains and planned to spend the weekend there to escape city pressure. Then, almost casually, he mentioned that Michael had once told him how much Evelyn loved nature and peaceful places. And he wondered if she might enjoy joining him for a quiet weekend away since Michael would be occupied with an important project. The invitation stunned her into silence. Part of her immediately thought it was inappropriate, or at least unusual. But another part of her felt something awaken at the thought of leaving behind grocery lists, dirty dishes, and endless repetition. When she told Michael that evening, he seemed more distracted than concerned, simply shrugging and saying Richard was an honorable man, who probably just felt sorry for her spending so much time alone while he worked. Michael encouraged her to go, almost absent-mindedly, as if he didn't fully understand how strange and significant the invitation felt to her. That reaction hurt more than she expected, because it reminded her how invisible she had become in her own marriage. A few days later, Evelyn packed a small bag, trying to ignore the nervous excitement fluttering in her chest as she drove away from the city toward the mountains. The farther she traveled, the lighter she felt. The roads narrowed into winding paths surrounded by towering pine trees, and eventually she arrived at a secluded cedar cabin perched beside a breathtaking lake that reflected the sky like glass. Richard greeted her outside wearing old jeans and a wool sweater, looking far different from the polished businessman she remembered. Out there he seemed relaxed, almost younger, and his smile carried genuine warmth. From the moment she stepped inside, Evelyn felt something shift. The space was beautiful without trying too hard, filled with books, handmade furniture, soft blankets, and the scent of wood, smoke, and cedar. It felt lived in, peaceful, deeply personal. Richard showed her to a guest room overlooking the lake, then made tea, while they sat near the fireplace talking quietly as evening settled over the water. Unlike most people, he listened carefully when she spoke. He asked questions no one had asked her in years, not out of politeness but sincere curiosity. He wanted to know what she enjoyed, what books she loved, what dreams she once carried before life became responsibilities. At first, Evelyn answered cautiously, embarrassed by how long it had been since anyone seemed interested in her thoughts. But slowly she found herself opening up in ways she never expected. She admitted she had once dreamed of becoming an artist, before marriage and motherhood consumed her time. She confessed that sometimes she felt as though parts of herself had quietly disappeared. Richard never interrupted or tried to fix anything. He simply listened with a level of attention that made her feel seen for the first time in decades. They spent the next day exploring trails around the lake, sharing meals on the porch, and sitting beneath endless stars that looked impossibly bright away from city lights. Nothing inappropriate happened, yet the emotional connection unsettled her, because it felt deeper than attraction. It was recognition. Richard spoke openly about his late wife and how grief had changed him, how solitude taught him to appreciate silence instead of fearing it. Evelyn found herself telling him things she had buried for years, little disappointments and forgotten hopes she barely admitted to herself. Together they wandered through forests filled with golden sunlight, paddled a canoe across still water, and shared long stretches of silence that somehow felt more intimate than conversation. At one point, Richard showed her an old wooden box containing charcoal pencils and sketchbooks his daughter had left behind. He placed them gently in her hands and told her she should try drawing again because people shouldn't abandon parts of themselves that once made them feel alive. The words affected her more than she wanted to admit. That evening, while Richard read quietly beside the fire, Evelyn sat near the window sketching the outline of the lake, with trembling hands. The drawing itself wasn't particularly good, but the feeling that came with it overwhelmed her. For the first time in years, she felt connected to herself again, as though a locked door inside had quietly opened. Later they sat outside, wrapped in blankets beneath the stars, while the wind moved softly through the trees. Evelyn confessed that she often felt like she had spent years moving through life half asleep, so focused on being useful to everyone else that she forgot who she was underneath it all. Richard told her that sometimes people don't need dramatic changes. Sometimes they only need space to hear their own thoughts again. His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. By the final morning, Evelyn dreaded leaving more than she expected. The cabin had become more than a retreat. It had become a mirror reflecting the woman she used to be before years of quiet sacrifice blurred her identity. Before she drove away, Richard thanked her for bringing warmth back into the cabin and encouraged her not to let the creative spark disappear. Their goodbye was simple, respectful, and unexpectedly emotional because both understood the connection between them had never been about romance. It was about understanding. During the drive home, Evelyn noticed everything differently. The sky seemed brighter, the air fresher, the world more vivid somehow. When she walked back into her house, Michael barely glanced away from the television before asking if she had enjoyed herself. Normally, that indifference would have wounded her deeply, but this time it didn't. She realized the transformation that happened during the weekend belonged entirely to her. It didn't require explanation or validation. Over the following week, subtle changes began unfolding in her life. Evelyn bought new sketchbooks and started drawing again. Every evening at the kitchen table, she spent more time outdoors tending flowers, taking walks, and noticing little moments of beauty she used to ignore. Strangely, her relationship with Michael even improved because she no longer expected him to fill the emptiness she had been carrying inside herself for years. She became more patient, more alive, more present. Eventually, she suggested they take a small trip together somewhere quiet by the ocean, and Michael looked genuinely surprised by the idea, almost as if he were seeing a different version of his wife emerging in front of him. Evelyn never fully explained what happened during that weekend at the cabin because there was no dramatic affair or scandal to confess. The true significance of those days couldn't easily be described. It was simply the experience of being understood by another human being, at a moment when she had nearly forgotten herself entirely. Richard had reminded her that beneath the routines, obligations, and years of quiet compromise, the woman who once dreamed, created, and felt deeply was still there waiting to be rediscovered. And in the end, that realization changed far more than any romance ever could.